Well, okay, and I can be stationary. Really? I can. Can you hear me okay? All right, very good. All right, so that I'm going to bounce off of a few things I saw here with the meditation with the beach scene. When I was a little girl, Tiki growing up, we would go to Holly Beach. Nothing like the Gulf beaches or the Atlantic beaches. I mean, there were pigs on the beach, okay? I didn't see too many of those quiet places because by the time we got there, everything was rocking and rolling. It was about 45 minutes from where I lived, and we brought the party with us, and the party was already going when we got there, and it was the dirtiest beach you ever could see, but I didn't know any other beach, so that was okay. So anyway, and also the clapping and the singing and everything. I guess because I grew up in such a dichotomy, things were quiet at my grandmother's house, and they were loud and raucous at home because of all my brothers. They were all musicians. It started off with my oldest brother playing the drums, and we couldn't afford any other instruments, so everybody else played the drums too, until one of my brothers was able to afford my guitar. So it was drum, 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 drums, a little bit of guitar. And so it was so loud there that what I loved to do was, when my mama would say her three famous words, go play outside, which is what we always did. And I would take a blanket and a book and go out and lie down under the pine trees, a grove of pine trees that we had by our house. And that was a very special time for me just to be. And I still have that. There's that part of me that wants to go out and party and pass it the time. They say they bon temps relais, but there's also that part of me that likes to be quiet and alone. And I think we all need a little bit of both, huh? And I think even though this wasn't part of my program, but they were all Cajun Women on Fire that I'm going to tell you about. This program is an hour. I'm going to try to cut it down to 20. We're going to do that, right? It's just it's a small part of a larger program. And I'm bouncing around a little bit already, but this woman who called me to do this program last year, she saw it on my website, and I had listed women inspired and on fire. I had a totally different program in my mind for that program. And I had done some work for her before, so she called and she asked if I would do it. And so she said, would you send me a synopsis, right, for their advertising? So I sent her a little paragraph about what the program was. And she wrote back, oh, I thought it was Cajun. I could feel it in her voice. Oh, I thought it was Cajun. So I wrote back, what makes this program Cajun is the teller. She wrote back, I want more. Okay, so then I had to change the whole program. And that's how this program came to be, Cajun Women Inspired and on Fire. I looked back in my history, and I picked out 4 women. But you just brought up a 5th one this morning with the dancing. I felt like dancing with that song, So I'm going to call it Cajun Women Inspired and on Fire. Just for fun. Okay, I'm going to give a D later on. Remind me of that, okay? When I get through with the fire, I'm going to give you a D. Who's going to remind me? No? Okay. Well, you'll remind me of the D. She will. She won't ever forget. All right, so fire. Who were the women that put fire into me? And it began with my grandma, the one I told you about earlier that picked me up when I was 3 and said, I'm taking her home with me. And she did basically raise me. I only went home for school. And if occasionally, my earliest childhood memories are with my grandmother. They're not with my mother at home. My school years, I remember being with my mother. And we were only 5 miles away. It wasn't like we were an eternity away from each other. And we always went to church next to where my grandmother lived. We were Catholic, and so we would go to the Catholic church where my grandmother lived in Bell City. We didn't go to where we were supposed to go. We went to where the roots were. And my grandmother, I have to give the F in fire for family, because she created family. She created that sense of belonging and that bringing everyone together. She had all the family meals. She had all the family celebrations. I learned later it was because she was stubborn and wouldn't let anybody else do it, but that didn't matter. She gave us family, so therefore she gave us roots. Now, my grandmother loved to quilt, so all the women would come to her house, and she had the 4 hooks at the top of the ceiling in the dining room, above the dining room table. And whenever there was a quilt to be put together, the quilt on the top and the batting and the bottom part, whenever that was to be done, they would all gather at my grandmother's house, and they would hook that quilt up to the boards, the 4 boards that were, and they had the clamps on the 4 corners, and they would roll that to just above the dining room table level, and they would pull chairs around it, and they would talk and sew and talk And they talked in English when they wanted me to know what they were saying, because I was always somewhere close by, usually underneath the quilt, playing with my paper dolls and the Sears and Roebuck catalog and things like that, or just lying down there watching the light above and watching their hands clacking and moving above, and the talking and the sharing. But when they didn't want me to know what they were saying, those were the juicy stories. They spoke in French. And I guess I honored them enough to not question that, you know. That was like a sacred language, and I wasn't old enough to know it. But that's where I heard the story about the land. And that was the land that my granddaddy and my grandmother lived on, which had been homesteaded years before. And it was down to the 40 acres that they lived on. And my granddaddy had made a trade. Just like you would take the eggs to barter at the country store, my granddaddy traded the 40 acres of land they lived on, their home, for 40 acres in town, in Lake Charles. The story goes that my grandmother, Boudade, she pouted and she fussed and she cried so much all the way through that move, where they physically did move to Bell City, but she made his life so miserable that he had to do a trade back. Actually traded back with whoever he traded with, and they got back to the home. And that, to me, was a powerful woman, not one to let go of family. Because she knew if they went there, that the family roots would be gone. For a long time, I thought that was a negative thing. I thought, she should have followed her husband, you know. Well, a storyteller one time, I told a little bit of that to him, and he said, you know, she was giving you your roots. She was holding them steady for you so you didn't lose them. And I thank my grandmother for putting that kind of fire, F, into the family fire. You know what I mean? She kept it sacred. For the I, I'm going to give it to my mama. For ingenuity and inspiration. My mama could make literally something out of nothing. She didn't have much. They lost a lot. My mother had 3 little boys under the age of 4 when she became a World War II widow. Yeah. My grandmother and my granddaddy drove to Texas in their pickup truck, picked her up and all of her belongings and her 3 little boys and the 6 of them went back to Bell City. They had bought a little house and moved it next to their house in the country, and they made a home for Mama and her 3 little boys. Making something out of nothing. She was homeless. And then not too long after that, she met a dashing young man on a horse, and it happened to be my daddy, who was 10 years younger than her. And I don't know what flew then, but a lot of fire, I guess. And they made a couple and then made 3 more kids. And something happened between my granddaddy and my daddy. It's a longer story, but they moved away 5 miles to start a new life with my daddy's side of the family, okay, on that property. And my mother there were 6 children and 2 adults in a 2-room house. Ooh. 2 rooms. I was 5 years old when they added to the house to make bedrooms, separate bedrooms, and a bathroom. My mother was able to make something out of nothing, because until I was 10, I didn't ever think of the word poor. So my mother was an amazing woman at being able to create. So she inspired me and put that sense of ingenuity of how not to, when things go wrong, there's always a way. There's always a way. So I'll give the I to my mom. And then we moved from the word fire to the R. And that's my Tante Relisha. I'm going to give it to my Tante Relisha. That was my grandma's sister. She was the wealthy one on my mother's side of the family, because she married a man that had a lot of land. And a lot of land in South Louisiana meant the possibility of oil. And that's what happened. But it wasn't him, her husband, that made it happen, really. It was her finesse with, she always said, when you can read, you can do anything. You can learn about anything, and you learn how to do things. And so she advocated reading. So don't really, I'm going to give her the R for her name and the word reading, because she taught herself. She was a self-taught businesswoman, because her husband, with his riches, he became an alcoholic and died young. And with the riches that she was left with, she was able to make more and put her 2 sons through college. And she always would say to me, because when I would go visit, after my grandfather died, my grandmother moved to the little town near Aunt Reilly, and I would visit with her a lot, and she'd say, you have to read. If you can read, you can learn how to do anything. So she gave me the gift of reading. I'm speeding through this on to E. Fire. The fire. These women put something into me that has never gone away. Now the E I'm going to give to Garlene. I know, Garlene. Have you ever known a Garlene? In my family, we have an Arlene, a Charlene, and a Garlene. And just recently, I discovered, you know how you just discover things? I'm doing memoir writing now, and I've been getting interested in genealogy. And 17 years ago, at my brother's funeral, a man handed a booklet to me. And he said, you might find this interesting. Well, it was his family's history, so I thought, oh, well, thank you. And I had teenage girls, I was working full-time, teaching school, I had a full life. I went home from the funeral and I put it somewhere. Recently, with this memoir class, I was looking for a letter and I found the book. And it wasn't just his family, it was his family at the end of the book, but he was related to my grandfather. He was my grandfather's second cousin, so from that point back all the way to France was my heritage, my family. I didn't know. And in that story, there's a woman named, all right, remember Arlene, Charlene, and Garlene? Baseline Derwan. She was one of my ancestors. She was the widow who came to that community of where I grew up with 7 sons. And those 7 sons procreated muchly, and that's where I came along. All right, so you see, so there's Arlene, Charlene, Garlene, and now I'm going to work on a story about Baseline, because I hear she was fascinating. But I digress. Okay, so Garlene, what did Garlene give to me? I'm going to give her the E for education. She was the first person, not just woman, but the first person on my daddy's side of the family in Louisiana to get a college degree. She was 10 years older than I am, and I just, even though she was this tall, they called her Pee-wee for a reason. She grew, everybody called her Pee-wee, nobody called her Garlene. But she was that tall, she was a teeny tiny woman, but full of fire, and she was so enthusiastic, and she put herself through college and got a teaching degree and didn't stay in the area. She was the first woman to leave Southwest Louisiana in our family, and she moved to Hawaii. Now, some people went to Texas, but that was about it. She went to Hawaii. She wanted to know more, to explore, and she wasn't married. Ooh, that was a no-no in our family, to leave home without being married, single women. She went to Hawaii, and I was so inspired by her, and she met a man, and they got married, and well, they were going to get married, and she asked me to be in her wedding, and I was so honored to be in her wedding. But in the meantime, I had decided, I had been inspired to go to college from her and my 2 best friends, and the entrance exam was on the same day as her wedding, and they couldn't change it because they had planned, coming from Hawaii, and I was in a dilemma, and I told her about it, and she said, I know you want to be at my wedding, but I want you to get this degree more than I want you at my wedding. And so I went and I took the entrance exam, teary, and missed the wedding. But it was wonderful. It was wonderful. It was wonderful. And I went on to college, and my senior year I got married, and that following spring in March, an earthquake happened in Peru. What does that have to do with me? Well, it caused a tidal wave, which caused a tsunami in Hawaii. there were 6 teachers who were on break from a conference in Hilo. One of them was my Garlene. One lived to tell about it, but she didn't. You know, she went for it. She went for her dream. She lived her life to the fullest, and her death was on the most beautiful place, one of the most beautiful places in the world. I give the great big E for enthusiasm and education to my cousin, my cousin, Pee-wee, a little woman with a big heart and a great mind for adventure. So that's the fire. That was the fire that I was brought up with, women that just inspired me. And then there's the D, fire, fired up, right? Well, I couldn't help it when you played the happy song to think about my mama on my daddy's side. I'm going to have to think, because she can't be left out. She gave me the love of dance and partying. Now, on Sunday morning, my grandma would be at church in Bell City. But my mama would be listening to French music and dancing on the kitchen floor barefoot. Now, I didn't get to see it because I had to go to church on Sunday, but if she was visiting with us, because when her husband died, she lived with each one of her children for 3 months out of the year. She spread the wealth. We tolerated it because she slept with me. That was interesting. But because I was the only girl, and we had to share a bed. And she would, when she would be at our house on Saturday morning, she would be dancing to the French music barefoot. So I give her, the D for fired up, because she gave me that joyful enthusiasm and excitement for life. And so that's my story of the four women plus one that inspired me to be the fully Cajun woman I am today. But just briefly, I didn't stop. It was really interesting because then I met, before I became a storyteller, I met a woman named J.J. Renaud, she was a well-known, internationally traveled Cajun woman who played music and shared story. And she accused me of letting down my heritage by not telling Cajun. I said, Michelle, I don't know any. She said, well, then tell mine for anything else. So in honor of JJ, you might have heard it before, but I'm going to tell a quick little JJ story. She passed on in the year 2000, young woman, 44, and too early. And I just recently contacted her husband, and he's given me permission to tell any of her stories, as long as I give her credit, so that the heritage will continue. I'm going to step away from this. Well, I'll do it here for the video. So this is in honor of JJ. Actually, could you cut the video for this? Because I promised him I would not videotaping it for work. I just feel like